and welcome to another edition of Breakfast with Brian. I'd like to remind you that if you wish, you can comment or raise a question about any of these editions on Facebook or on Messenger. I look forward to you doing that. Meanwhile, today, we're still looking in the first letter of Peter, and this time in chapter 5 and verse 6, where it reads, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you." What a wonderful and encouraging verse that is. I want to draw our attention to a little phrase in the middle of that, in due time. God's time, God's timing. This is always a bit problematical for us as human beings, having to wait for God. We want things done now, and God says, "I know better." For some reason or another, only known to him. And I think of the Hebrews way back who were looking for God to intervene in their affairs and bring a deliverer, a savior. And they went for centuries looking forward to that. And what did they do in the process? Some of them got tired of waiting, and they resorted to their own devices, and they did what they thought was the best way to handle the situation, always with disaster as a result. So we're no different today. We approach God for some situation in our lives, and he seems to take such an awfully long time answering it. So often we take things into our own hands. I remember Abraham did the same thing, didn't he? When he was promised a child. And it seemed so long coming that he took matters in his own hand. And as a result, we have Ishmael and his descendants to contend with. Waiting can seem interminable, especially if we have an urgent situation in hand. But I want you to realize that God hasn't forgotten you. You see, in that reading we read, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. He really does. So what do I do when I get in this situation? Because there are times when I get impatient and I'm anxious about things. And so what do I do? Well, at some stage in that process, I try to encourage myself. David was reported at one time to have encouraged himself in the Lord. And I try to do that, not by dwelling on the problem in mind, but dwelling on the other wonderful things that God has provided, because that problem is just one part. I was going to say small part, but you might think, well, mine isn't a small part. But it is one part of God's wonderful grace to us. And I think of the fact that Jesus came and I've been born again by his Spirit and I've become a child of God. He is now my Father who loves me dearly, supplies all my needs, watches over me. He's the one who brings peace and joy into life. He's the one who provides a way where there seems to be no way, Or sometimes we have to wait, don't we? This is what we're talking about, the waiting. Other times I go to somebody else, maybe my wife, or she comes to me, or I go to a trusted friend, not somebody who will commiserate with my misfortune, but someone who will encourage me in the Lord to stay strong in faith. The amazing thing is that when we encourage each other in the Lord, when we encourage ourselves in the Lord, that way, turning our mind for a moment away from the issue in mind, we find that time passes more quickly, more wonderfully. In fact, sometimes the whole period of waiting seems to become a little shorter. And when we're in that situation, of course, we think, oh, I wish that would happen to me. But I can reassure you that God does care for you. He has your best in mind. Don't go running to other things. Don't go running to other people. Keep trusting the Lord, for in due time, He will lift you up. God bless you today. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye from Breakfast with Brian.